Twilight Bible Study at Pilgrim Congregational Church in Pomona, California. We're very glad to have you for our Bible study tonight, which will focus Bible Study at Pilgrim Congregational Church in Pomona, California. That's not good. Very glad to have you for.
My fault.
Well,
What are we missing, though?
what are we missing?
What goes on in between?
What did we skip over?
Yeah.
More speeches. I'll cover them a bit. Yeah. I'll cover them a bit. And let's see. So it looks as if Lorraine is on her own phone now. All right. Welcome to all of you. I think we may have another couple of people show up. Hello, the door. So I don't know if she heard that I buzzed her in. Okay. Guess we'll find out. She was talking to someone else. I think it's Teresa. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I believe Teresa
did
said,
she manage to
I
clear
don't
the
know.
entrance?
I'm not sure.
Let me get you.
Yeah, thank you, Art. Yeah, that chair needs to be glued. Isn't it? Hello, welcome. All right. So it's
You.
oh,
So when
thank
you
you.
study, they have those stickers.
Oh, good. Okay,
Sticky.
nice. Yeah, I use those. Yes, I definitely use those. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I've got a bunch of them on my desk. Teresa just brought me a folder of with the notebooks and stickies. Yeah.
With a pen.
Yeah, with a pen. Yeah, nice. I use those a lot. If you look through my books, you see little stickers on them. All right, so we're in Job chapter 38, and the more astute of you will have recognized that we skipped over some more chapters again.
We're holding you to it.
Yeah, right. So Maria said, so what did we miss? Cedric's made a similar comment this morning, and I said, you didn't read it? Yeah, Steve thought that was particularly funny. Yes, Job, we were last week in Job 23, and that was Job's bitter complaint.
What chapter again?
Last week was 23. Tonight we're going to be in 38.
38.
Yeah. So I'm going to cover a few things. If you remember in 23 last week, he ends by saying that, therefore I'm terrified at his presence when I consider I am in dread of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If only I could vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face. We found that there were different translations of that. Some were less severe than others. But in 24, Job continues his complaints, and this time in 24, he talks a lot about how much evil there is in the world and how bad things happen so frequently and so often, and how terrible it is about orphans and poor infants and the naked and the hungry and the poor and the needy. The murderer rises at dusk to kill the poor and needy, and in the night is like a thief. And so it talks about Job talks about all the horrible things of life. And then his friend Bildad responds in a very brief chapter. 25 is only 6 verses. Bildad says, well, how can a mortal be righteous before God? It's just not possible. And Job seems to concur, saying that God's majesty is unsearchable. In chapter 26 and chapter 27, we have here what sounds as if Job is sort of giving a defense of God, or at least saying in verse 4 or 3 and 4, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood and my tongue will not utter deceit. So he is saying, I will not put away my integrity. Remember, early on, we talked about the wife saying to Job to curse God and die. And I think that that statement is not like it's not exactly like what we'd think of cursing someone, saying, damn you, and being done with them. It's this God is a particular kind of is a special sort of character in this story, in this narrative. In fact, the sort of character that's not really a character at all. And so the issue here of cursing God would be more like our it would be more like our conceding defeat. There's a kind of toughness to Job here, where he's going to maintain his integrity. That is, he's going to keep his cool and his calm. He's not going to, as a kind of virtue, right? And we see this in various cultures, and that seems to be what's happening here. That is, just hold it together, right? But the wife seems to be saying, you're in a bad way. Just be done with it. So curse God here really means let go of your life and your integrity, this kind of toughness, and just admit you're beaten. Admit that you've lost. And one of the reasons I say this is that, well, a couple of things. One is that the idea of cursing God would be, in our modern context, would be more like, the rejection of God and God's existence, as it were. And that really wasn't an option, as I've been saying, in ancient Hebrew. Another way to think about this is that my professor reminded me once that you can't spit at God and miss. So it's not so God then is not the sort of person or thing or being that may or may not be there. If you curse God, then it's not like a optional type of thing. It's more like an approach to the whole of your life. So I think these things are important to remember, and that's kind of what's going on here in chapter 27. And then chapter 28 is a bit of an odd interlude um, that is about wisdom and where wisdom is found. Um, the the important point is in verse 13, uh, mortals do not know the way to it. Mortals do not know the way to it, and it is not found in the land of the living. That's verse 13 of chapter 28.
Wisdom?
Yeah, wisdom. Then Job returns to defending himself in chapters 29, 30, and 31. And he is again is he's sort of defending his integrity, his righteousness, his life, um, and basically saying that he looked for that he helped those who were needy, he grieved for the poor. And in verse 26 of chapter 30, but when I looked for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and are never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. Um, so he keeps going through 31. And then in 32, a new character shows up. It seems like a younger guy. Um, he's um, he's rebukes the friends, um, and he says that here's a reference. Interestingly, in verse 19 of 32, there's the reference to wineskins that Jesus makes a reference to, like new wineskins, it is ready to burst. I must speak so that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. I will not show partiality to any person or use flattery toward anyone. He's implying that the friends have been doing this sort of in it. I know you may find this hard to believe, but sometimes when people speak, it's in order to impress other people. Yeah. Yeah. I've been known to do that time too. Yeah. And so he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to speak honestly and genuinely. Rebukes Job in chapter 33. Um, um, and
We're talking about Elihu.
this is Elihu, yeah.
Elihu.
Yeah, or Elihu, yeah.
All right.
Who is
Um,
Elihu?
I don't know. but
This is a young guy who comes on the scene toward the end and gives another speech. And at first he rebukes the three friends from earlier, and then he rebukes Job. He basically says to Job, "You're wrong for saying that you're righteous,
Mhm.
that no one is righteous before God." Um, and and um, and he challenges Job, "Why do you speak to God in this way?" Uh, and verse 14, "For God speaks in one way and in two, though people do not perceive it. In a dream and a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals while they slumber on their beds, then he opens their ears and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn them aside from their deeds and keep them from pride, to spare their souls from the pit, their lives from traversing the river." Um, so that speech goes on through 34 and 35 and 36. He condemns self-righteousness. He exalts God's goodness in 36 and 37. And at the end of 37, Um, we see this is Elihu again, ending his speech. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power and justice and abundant righteousness. He will not violate. Therefore, mortals fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. And then we come to chapter 38, which is the Lord's answer. And the text says that it's the Lord answers Job, but I think it's okay to understand by the response here that that it's to the friends as well, to Elihu and the friends. That the text says it's to that he answers Job, but there's a lot going on here. So let's get into it. I think what I'd like to do is read the first. Let's see, what do I want to do here? Well, let's read the first verse.
Mhm.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. So the word used here for whirlwind is a word that can also simply mean a storm.
Mhm.
And it's fairly common in the Bible to find God speaking out of a storm. Several passages in the Psalms, in Ezekiel, in the other prophet books of Nahum and Zechariah. And so the term here, in fact, can be specifically a whirlwind, but it might also be a term that's simply used for a violent storm. And it's the same term that's used in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4, that the God's appearance to that same word is used. So let's see if I can find that. It's the very beginning of Ezekiel 1, chapter 4, the vision of the chariot. And chapter 1, verse 4. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. So this was a theophany, an appearance of God. Now, one of the puzzles here, you may remember that the first I can't remember if it was a devotional or the first Bible study. I think it was devotional where I referenced the Tetragrammaton, the use of the four letters which are translated as Lord in most English texts, and is a term that is not pronounced in most Jewish traditions. That term shows up in the framework of the book, that is chapters 1 and 2, and the last chapter of the book, that word for God, but it doesn't show up anywhere else in any other speeches except for here in chapter 38. Now, what that suggests to scholars is that that's one of the things that lies behind the suggestion that the editing of this book included different resources, and chapters 1 and 2 and the ending are kind of a sort of a straightforward didactic lesson or story about how when someone suffers, they should maintain their integrity and continue to praise God, and everything will go well with them. And so it's kind of like kind of a fable. Do this well, and things will go well with you. And well, the editor of the text, I think, what most scholars seem to be suggesting is that the editor keeps that kind of the way it is in the first two chapters and in the last chapter. And then he has all these intervening chapters that are much more elegantly written, and they are much more complex. We find Job is not always maintaining his integrity. He is very upset. He's complaining, asking questions of God. You have the friends that are being very hard on Job for most of the time. Um, and in all of that, the words for God that are used are like El and Elohim and Eloah and Shaddai, but not the so so yeah, it's a very interesting feature that suggests that the editor is, which is God's speaking. So the thing to remember about a text, this is so important that, and I said this in the devotional even about the Ten Commandments, that is, of course, the Ten Commandments are from God. And of course, there is this very important sense in which God's words are from God. But it's also important to remember that when we receive what God has said, we receive it as human beings. So it's already imperfect, right? Even as we receive it. So this is why there's so many difficulties with trying to say, you know, that I have the answer, or we have the answer to everything, or we know what to do, or this is, you know, the Ten Commandments are something that we absolutely have to follow in every circumstance. Well, that's just not true. I mean, there are times when we justify lying, and quite rightly. Well, yeah, well, I had this, but Robert Elwood always likes to remind us that in the Ten Commandments, particularly the thou shalt not murder, that we have all these exceptions to this in common legal society, right? Self-defense, just war theory, all kinds of ways that we morally that we try anyway to morally justify killing. So it's I think the main thing to get from that is that that it's that these issues are not easy, that they're complex. And you could say, and I wouldn't say that you're wrong, you could say, well, you know, this is what's complex. Don't kill. That seems pretty straightforward. And I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But it seems to me that you could show some compassion for someone who is defending a child, you know, or defending someone who's innocent. And it seems to me that it does pretty immediately become a very complex sort of issue. And so, yeah, go ahead.
So we're suggesting that overall the Ten Commandments as originally written are subject to some sort of interpretation in our modern age.
Well, I think what I would say is there are a couple of issues going on. One is that, of course, there at some level, there's interpretation is always happening, regardless of what. and especially when it's when it's translated into another language, right?
Yeah.
So everything is interpreted in a sense. So there's that one sense in which it's all interpreted. Now, there are things in our tradition, our shared tradition, I think, that are not really up for interpretation, maybe. I mean, I guess in some ways they might be, but there's a pretty broad consensus on some things like, you know, not torturing human beings, or at least not torturing children, or not, or torturing animals just for the sake of torturing them. That is a fairly broad consensus that's absolute. So, and I don't have any problem with using the word absolute. That is, that these are absolutely true. But if they're always absolutely true in a context, that is, it's always what's important, it seems to me, about sacred scripture and the life of the Christian is that its truth always lies in whether we live it or not. That is, you've heard me say this before. Words are a dime a dozen. I mean, words are cheap. I can say all kinds of things, and Jesus emphasizes this, and I think the prophets emphasize this. You see that there's this really big difference between words that you say and how you live. And so I guess that's and I think this is actually a central issue of the book of Job, that the friends and Job, and, you can say all kinds of things. What really matters here is how you live. Now, I will say, and we'll get to this in a moment, the book of Job is concerned with understanding, that is human understanding, but it's a particular conception. We'll get to it in just a minute. So that's verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. It's interesting. Verse 1 has this tetragrammaton that's not used anywhere else. It's hard to figure out exactly why, except that it seems to be an editor issue. Okay. Well, yeah.
Who was the editor?
Well, we don't know. I mean, it's just that the text itself seems to show that it had an editor. That I mentioned this, I think, in the first introduction to the text, that scholars trying to date the text have real trouble dating, because some of it looks like it might be as old as 10th century BCE. However, several other scholars have suggested that, yes, the style is an ancient style of writing, but it's the cleverness of the editor who is intentionally writing in this older style. So that years later, in other words, centuries after this, but somewhere between the 10th century and probably 3rd or 4th century BCE. So it's hard to put a time on it. So, some scholars have suggested that it maybe contains some of the oldest text in the Bible, that it might be extreme, very, very old. Others are not. A book that has been edited from different, and the very end, which is chapter 41, 42, 41, 42, or is it just 42? Let's move on to verses 2 and 3. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. So This response really sets the tone for the whole book and the theme of the entire book. These two verses right here. If you memorize any verse, it should probably be this one. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? And it directly raises the question of Job's standing to be able to challenge God and God's counsel. So Job has made these complaints. Job has even raised questions about whether God has done a good job of creation because there are all these problems. So it's very, I mean, so in that way, the friends are not entirely wrong. The things that Job are saying technically fit the definition of blasphemy. I mean, he's basically questioning, implying whether God is, well, the way I defined blasphemy, I think last week, was that blasphemy is saying or doing anything that implies that God is not God. And so this response basically says, who are you? In other words, what standing do you have to raise these questions of God, and to do so without any knowledge of these things?
Who's
So
talking?
This is the Lord
Talking
speaking
to
to
Job.
Job. Yeah, the Lord
So,
speaking to
that's
Job.
a heavy implication, if you like, from the Lord onto Job, that he doesn't know much.
Yes, that is the heavy notion
Without
here.
knowledge. I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah, words without knowledge.
That's a lot of us.
And now, in modern parlance, this would be seen as a very evasive answer, right? That is, that God is avoiding answering Job's questions, right? That if you were, if this were two ordinary people speaking and someone said, who do you think you are to ask me these questions, right? And of course, this is a central issue of the text, and I can't say it any more plainly than that God is not human. That that is as plain as I think you can say it. The reason why Job's doesn't have the standing is that Job, in order for Job to have the standing, this person that he's complaining about would have to be another human being, and God is not human. So God is God. So it doesn't work.
And the entire rest of this chapter is a series of who questions, who, where, and when, and so forth.
Yes.
All seemingly about the same tone.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So Art has looked ahead and cheated a bit and discovered that this same tone continues with specific examples. And yeah, we'll read those in just a minute. But what's important here is that the question of knowledge is at stake here. And there's a certain there's a logical limit here. It's not that, in my view, it's not that Job is not wise, and maybe he's not very wise, it's not that he's not wise, it's not that he's not smart, it's not that he doesn't have enough information, but it's that he's human. And he
Honest.
he doesn't have, so he doesn't have the standing to be able to speak to God
Mhm.
as if God were just one of the guys. Uh, um, so remember how I mentioned that the first couple of chapters set up a kind of legal court in heaven, right? It felt a little bit like God and this character called the what did I call him? The questioner, the adversary, um, which is a real title in certain legal contexts. It's a technical legal title. So you have this heavenly legal court, and then much of what Job says in the intervening chapters is, I got to find this place. So he doesn't say it directly, but the implication seems to be, I'm looking for this place where I can make my case before God, right? Um, and these verses in chapter 38 basically make it clear that that legal context is not available to Job. And again, not because he's not smart enough, but because he's human, as the next few verses will make clear. Um, and there is a kind of, I mean, Job, I should say, God does answer Job in the narrative. So there is a sense in which God, I keep saying Job, in which God is responding to Job, answering Job and his demand to be heard. But God is not doing so in the way that Job wanted God to or demanded that God do so. And this, I think, is clear in the statement that verse 3, gird up your loins like a man, that is, get ready to defend yourself, because this is going to be rough, what I'm about to say. And if you want a legal court with me, it'll be one in which I will question you, and you shall make declarations to me, not the other way around. Uh, very, very direct. And
To do make God upset.
yeah, well, that is yeah, it does seem that that there's a certain kind of righteous indignation being.
Well, they put up with a lot all the way through all of these verses up to there.
Yeah, so Maria says that
That's
there's a yeah, there's a lot of speeches are made. Yes, in the intervening chapters, lots of speeches. God has had to listen to a lot, I suppose, or maybe God wasn't listening. I don't know.
I wonder, as an illiterate in Bible
Yeah.
study, but what I hear about Job formally is that Job suffered all these, travel, whatever problems that anyone could suffer,
Yeah.
loss of everything,
Right.
and illnesses, wives, and
Right.
fortune. And yet he was very his faith was strong.
Hmm.
How did that come from there, where he questioned and talked in front
Yeah.
of God so disrespectfully, and then went all the way to the end where he was so, steadfast in his faith in God?
Yeah, that seems to be what I say, the plot line.
Mhm.
But it fits what I was saying about the framing. That is, chapters 1 and 2 and 42 are this guy who's full of integrity and is not going to curse God.
Mhm.
and then the intervening chapters are feel more realistic, right? They feel more like reality, more like,
Mhm.
okay, this is what happens when someone suffers. In that, and it seems to me that this is what the text is doing. This is what it's doing for the reader. That is to say, okay, let's look inside. Let's not, this is not a, it's not, let's turn this simple fable into something deeply challenging and complex. And that's what happens. And you have, so you have the, you have the various arguments that are made by religious people about trying to explain why bad things happen. In this case, why did they happen to Job? Uh, and
So he's questioning, he's talking to God while he was suffering.
yeah, well,
All
part of
this event, this
yeah, in the
this
beginning,
misfortune.
yes, in the beginning, he
Uh-huh.
was maintaining his integrity. But as the story progresses,
He's trying to-
he begins to complain.
So
And he
he was human.
he was human after all. Exactly. He begins to complain and he begins to say to God, I don't deserve this. If God would just hear my case, God would agree that I don't deserve the kinds of things that are happening to me. And I just want God to speak up and to respond, to tell me what's going on. And if I could
What did I
find,
do wrong?
yeah, and if I could find this heavenly courtroom, the God would tell me. And then in 38, we get this response that it doesn't, that's not how it works.
So
Yeah.
God says,
Yeah. So God says that that's not how it works. You're speaking out of ignorance.
mhm.
And that's a really harsh way, of course, to think about it. But I think better maybe it's it's more like you don't know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Uh, the ignorance again is not the kind of ignorance that could be made up for if Job would read and learn more. Uh, it's a different kind of ignorance. It's really more of
Oh, God didn't really answer his question.
God does not, right? In one sense, God does not answer. But in another, yeah, this is what I want to get to in a minute. Yeah, about we'll get to that in just a minute about this understanding. Let's read the next few verses. Verse 4, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. I mean, that is very, very sarcastic. Uh, or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? I mean, were you there? Uh, so very rough beginning there for for Job. Um, and the creation is spoken of in terms of a building with a foundation, um, with measurements, straight lines that are used to build buildings, and um, what was the foundation placed on? What was the foundation? Very important in the ancient world. It's cornerstone, and then this reference to the heavenly beings. Um, um, yeah. Now there is wisdom at play here. And wisdom is something that human beings have access to. But the wisdom of the human being is more like the acknowledgement that one does not understand, the acknowledgement that this is beyond human understanding. I want to be very careful here because I don't think this text justifies ignorance. I don't think that's what the text is doing at all. In other words, I don't think the text is saying when you face difficult questions, it's fine for you just to say, I don't know. I don't think that's what the text is doing. I think the text is actually confronting Job and thereby confronting the reader with something very difficult that ought not to be easily dismissed. To simply say, I don't understand and I'm fine with that, I think is too easy. It lets us off way too easy. I think that what's at stake here is in fact wisdom. This is considered wisdom literature. And what's at stake here is a certain kind of understanding that deeply embraces and appreciates the limits of human understanding and how difficult and painful that is. Right? So it's not an easy dismissal. It's not like, oh, I can just get on with my life because this is not something I can understand because I'm human. So I can just go on. No, the wisdom literature is trying to get the reader to face up to this very difficult situation that human beings are in. That is their own limitedness, their own limited condition. And that involves understanding.
And a bit of humility.
Yes, right. Well, yes, it is the kind of understanding that leads to humility. I asked Dr. Robert, which is what Steve McMeans calls him, Dr. Elwood, about his work on different about understanding other cultures and other religious traditions. Oh, yeah. And his response was that he believes that one of the most important characteristics of being able to understand other religions and other cultures is empathy.
Absolutely.
Is that you have to have a kind of openness to being able to see how someone else might view a matter that is not from your perspective. That you have to have it's not that you have to agree with them, it's not that you have to live that way or anything of that sort, but because it's another human being, and they have a perspective that having that empathy to understand uh, this other perspective is extremely important.
As long as they disclose it to you.
I think that this is the kind of wisdom that is being taught here in the book of Job, that is a recognizing one's own. I mean, what it comes down to, as I said earlier, is an existential issue. That is, it's an issue for you and for you and for you and for me, that of how I'm going to live. Am I going to live in the humility of the acknowledgement that my understanding is limited? Um,
Agreed.
what's that?
I said the person has to kind of agree that that is what he said. That person has to.
Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of people are rebelling against trying to get some little ground.
oh yeah, I know. Mar is making the point about how the opposite point, which is that one of the reasons that we find conflict and war and is that people are not, they're refusing to be empathetic. They're
Usually.
refusing to see the other person's perspective. And I mean, it it's it's interesting how these issues are both complex and simple at the same time, because the other side of that is that, wow, that's so basic. Like, think of almost every conflict. It concerns this lack of ability or this lack of willingness to see the other side's perspective. Yeah.
No. But like I feel like I'm an open-minded person, and I do have the ability to empathize with the person. But as long as the person would allow me to understand that. If they don't, I will never.
Well, I
Like a resistance from somebody else. Why don't they want to explain it to me so I can understand better?
yeah, well, I understand
Instead
what
of-
I think
Instead of just like,
think I understand what you're
What-
saying. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, Teresa, which is also true. That is, in my view, empathy is not universal in the sense that not everybody practices it, right? And so it takes two to tango, as it were, uh, on both on the bad side and the good side. I mean, you could learn about the other side's perspective and decide, well, you could learn about it and even be accurate and decide that you need to go to war against them because you do understand their perspective, right? So it's not I don't mean that as a justification for war, but there are there are uh, attitudes and traditions of of hate and cruelty and evil that we find, and so it puts a Christian in a very difficult situation because as Robert said this morning the about the Ten Commandments. I think Robert's on here now, but it is he said about the Ten Commandments, and the, the just war theory and the qualifications and exceptions that we make to the Ten Commandments, he said, you know, in terms of the thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder. I mean, he said, I would like for that to be true for me all the time, even though there are all these exceptions, right? It is that, and yet, of course, as Americans who pay taxes and support a very large military that are, sometimes involved in things that we might question. Um, it's not as if we can wash our hands and say we're not. Yeah, right. Well, I don't want to get too political in this season. the last few uh, verses, we skip the verses which keep going, by the way, on and on. The same kind of, you know, who shut in the sea with doors? Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? And on till our lectionary picks it back up in verse 34. And this is very interesting because 34 through 38 continue the kind of these poetic, you'll see it in most translations, it's written as poetry. This poetic expression of the cosmos, of the makeup of the cosmos. So in 34 through 38, that continues. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you? In other words, thunder and rain. Can you send forth lightning so that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to numb clouds or can outer skins of heavens when into mass and the clouds cling together? Now, there is something really interesting here in verse 36. My text note, verse 6, is the word inward part. My note says it's exactly it could be, and the relation here, it could could be the ibis and the cock. The image were believed to announcing of them. The ibis would announce when the floods were coming to the Nile, and the cock would announce the coming of rain. So it could be that that in relationship to the West here in verse 34:9, you know, that these verbs to when the rains are coming. I was saying you do that. Pleasant on. So then interesting and at verse 39, the end of chapter 39, we have and one other is given as an example, and 30, 40, the print, the apple, and invert. Who provides for the raven? Its young's crop wander about for lack of food. What's interesting that verse 39 actually starts a whole nother section, all these animals, the world. I think the animals referred to are wild animals, and so the implication is that this is, these are domesticated animals that human beings have trained. Actually, wild animals live and take care of themselves. So, all right, questions or other comments? Yes, Art.
Well, earlier editions, headlines, I just read a summary piece describing who we are. What it's how to us as Christians understand, decide going to live, and that's our general statement of faith and been congregational.
Yeah. Yeah.
When to the extensive understanding of faith, I was reminded of confused to know what one knows, what one does not know, what one knows, knowledge. This is humility in that. or um, lack of.
Yeah.
And then, but my favorite actually is from Paul Simon, who once in a song, Slip Sliding Away, he says, God makes the information unavailable to the moron.
Yeah.
So that seemed to follow about. There's a lot of content and a lot for discuss.
Okay. No, that's very good. Say, as I said, this is about understanding. It's about understanding the limits of understanding, and the importance in women. I think it seems to be a day and um, when we hold, in such great esteem, education and advancement and so all of are pretty important to our church. This emphasis on education.
Uh,
It's
can I say?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a time when people lived closer to the land. You wouldn't find anybody land, and you wouldn't find anybody going toward maybe not knowing where it came from, or having an idea of what it is. I these first two guys, they will just yell out hooray, there's hold up, and the only thing we can do is appreciate it. Remember this and us. If they're hungry, walk out.
Yeah. That's a very good little thing. Yeah, I think that's probably, um, that in a cultural society would have much greater appreciation of word.
Well, Patrick,
Yes,
if I can add on to Lynn's wave of nostalgia. Okay, that's the thing out, right? I caught a nostalgia earlier in my when my or when I was in Jobbers. It had a passage that is very similar to what we just read. It's simplified for sake of an 11-year-old and amends it, but it's very close. It's to my because it's like, hey, Job is like, yeah, horses and what you're doing, you know my intention.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And no, it. You couldn't stand it, even try to explain to you, right? And again, that's gonna sound like an Asia, but I think that it's actually reflective of reality. That seems to me, or that is that things that be a true to experience life, I guess is what I'm saying. That these are things that are not explicable. They can't be explained. So wisdom asks question, okay, how then do we live in relationship to the inexplicable? How do you live in relation to God and creation, knowing there is life and variance? Wisdom is what I think us, and this is not far from the blue, but question does faith and in these situations? Um, that's I think that's very good, and thank you. other comments, questions before we, we're already past time. I guess we move on to prayer requests. We're gonna finish,
Yeah.
no, we're finished next week.
There we go.
We're gonna finish next, we're gonna be, I think, in chapter 42, which is another frame chapter, so, yeah,
Question.
Yeah. prayer requests.
Do you read beforehand the Bible? You let me know what you should prepare.
The passages for week are always printed in Pilgrim. You can find it there. If you want to read it, I am not assuming you had that you. I'm assuming that you're going, but not assuming that everyone has or that just you bet the church law that you had some encounter with Joe here and there. Yeah.
Then
Okay.
Scott.
Over. All right.
Can I move?
Please do.
I find these verses will be one of them because I was just waiting to do, but it's still to those who are trying to inspire him out his guilt. I just love the idea of talking about the Bible, about just being in to me, Bell is probably an expression of the moods are trying to that the anime thing happen. Yes, and that's the way it works. And the of it all is absolutely well.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's take a request. One request we have for Art, who's in a that we are praying will be common that could.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow's going cross surgery. It's a commentary. We are praying it over well, will not be a complicated. Yeah. Right. Yes. Again.
I do actually for days homes travel through the week and stress. But second, like the request for my cousin Stephanie and her family new times. Little
So is that so this an of your okay.
So we're being a bit
for
my cousin for me, Andrew, and Dad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So Mara has a connection in the middle who someone to help us get out and options you might or difficult or it's possible. So we'll pray for this couple for safety or their if on not sure about it. Okay, that would be a very important key is finding resources in California. More
yesterday was the day we went. Yeah, I had trouble.
Yes,
I was all right. So
I'm not anything. She'll probably call up. This will have some news week. Me as Morales yesterday, so knew that. She had some news down. She did some good news that charges have been discussed. So some I did for there is good news. And so in credit for serve and think that. So it's going well. She may got think that was I will have a full report next week, but I hope we'll have some more details about it. The thing we do for 3 individuals involved in that area in the church and all that. There were 3 men, 1 man in a truck who was injured, but seemed he was okay. The other 2 guys called not okay. I saw the actually the tail of it, the television gear, it's not good. So one of the four individuals I hear but there are a bunch of people who are trying to help and get the ambulance here as quick as possible. And I haven't updated, can't information them, but it was bad. Yeah. So away from the end, car Avenue, the same car and a truck, a pickup truck.
You want to have a passenger.
Pickup had just the car, driver, and passenger, and they were both. Yeah.
It's hard to go up with that. I
Yes.
two people.
Yes.
One is Teresa, and the other my Columbia. I don't know. I asked to pray to that she would be able to see she's lovable, and that she's not people to dress. I think or a being that all kind of did be herself.
Okay. So,
and then my auntie. Well, I pray that God could spare her. These in what coat, strap her around then she'll be just
that's a bit of
that's my vision of the ending of her life. It's been a person, and now she's joining. I help her crime time when I'm supposed to work. I took the time to see her, give her some medication, so she won't have to go through. At least if she it would be somehow not this type of ending. And God gave up her opinion because she ended up. I spent out prime work time with her. She's saying that she took her. I told her the week and then the day before, and then I called her. She was having lunch, and so people feel that planned 3 months ahead of time. She started to bake. She was angry about having to leave the hospital. We were arguing because I was determined that there was one woman exactly like Chinese family because it was to the point they cannot have one. So they have to force see my aunt is going to be that way. So ask her, please. Nobody wants to take her to she is.
I'm so sorry, Teresa. That's we'll certainly pray for Aunts. Any other
it's a bit like was Teresa, so my brother and they're gay and they are I don't really know how to explain them. It's a good deal of a mess again, and there's a chance they could be evicted. And the people are very nice where they are really nice, as well as it being a beautiful place. That they would have the right people of compassion, get the medical attention and psychological attention, especially that Robert seems to need. I'm viewing this from the outside in 2000, so it's hard to know just what's happening. I give them lots of prayers for their own light and real medical and psychological help that they need.
We'll certainly pray for them. And I know that we're for your peace as well. Let's
thank you.
Let's pray together. Thank you, God, joy of relationships here. We enjoy just with gratitude for that. And we pray the passion and wisdom to be able to share and with our family members our of love. We those lives in our community, protection of our friend Art and medical personnel will know in order to help him, and we're grateful for provide us with help, John, that you bring him home safely, for Johnny and Stephanie's mom who's dealing with that you would in that context as the illness. We pray for our friend and your son as soon as possible, that church family, and that we would enjoy the benefits as well. We pray for hearts are burdened by the disruption that people are experiencing, and we know that to provide resources that we might be able. Where our hearts are burdened by 3 men who are involved in their lives, for their